The Volume 2 of the College Football Playoff rankings were released last night.
The rankings strike back.
The rankings strike back. And again, people are mad. I do have some quote-unquote qualms with it, but it'll work itself out. But anyway, number 25, Tulane, seeing Tulane get back ranked, I actually appreciated that.
Sure.
They belong there. Number 24, 9-0 Army. What are we doing?
Too low?
Too low.
If they beat Notre Dame, it'll take care of itself.
It'll take care of itself. Number 23, I do not agree with this whatsoever, Missouri. I don't think that they should be ranked at all. I understand they're 7-2. I get it. I don't think they're the 23rd best team in college football.
They probably aren't, but they are 7-2, and a 7-2 SEC team that has losses to, two ranked teams? They're going to be in there.
LSU at 22, coming off of a couple of recent blowout losses. They still hold on at 22. Mm-hmm. South Carolina at 21.
Maybe the most up and down. That's a team that on the right day could beat Oregon, and on the wrong day would lose to Mississippi State. They're just a weird team.
They're more up lately than down.
They are.
Maybe
they
just
but
started to peak.
That makes you wonder about this weekend.
It certainly does. Clemson at 20, Louisville at 19, Washington State at 18. They are 8-1. Nice story there after the Pac-12 disbanded. Colorado at 17, Kansas State at 16, Texas A&M at 15, SMU at 14, Boise State at 13, Georgia at 12, Ole Miss at 11. So let's stop there, obviously.
That's where we said we thought they would be.
Yep.
And that's a probably correct ranking. They went up 5 spots.
Went up 5 spots,
yeah.
And I part of me thought that the committee was still going to put Georgia ahead of them.
Mm-hmm.
Like I thought that was going to happen. Mm-hmm. It should not have, and it didn't. But mm-hmm. I thought it. That's fine. And what that means is essentially
they're in.
They're in.
Yeah.
If they win their final 2 games, they will make it. College football is going to happen already. I mean, chaos is going to happen because it always does. But
when you look at what the bracket would be right now, I need someone like you or me on this committee because we're not doing what they're going to be. We're not missing out on a potential Quinshon Judkins versus Ole Miss matchup. Ole Miss is going to be the 12 if Ohio State is the 5. That is going to happen in Brian Haydad's world. I mean, I know Richard Cross would love nothing more than to go to Happy Valley and put a big middle finger right in James Franklin's face. But that matchup, Judkins versus the Rebels, needs to happen. They've got to be the 12 if Ohio State is the 5.
Especially if they stay right here at in this spot. But yeah, I mean that's what I thought they would be. I understand why they are behind Alabama. So Alabama at 10, Miami at 9. Quite frankly, I think if the Ole Miss that's played the last 3 weeks lines up across the field for Miami, they would beat them.
Oh, they would beat them by 3 touchdowns.
So Miami at 9. Georgia goes from 3 to 12.
Mm-hmm. That's their second loss, though.
I know, but Miami goes from 4 to 9, and their loss was worse.
I get that, but they dropped 5 spots for 1 loss. That's 2 losses. Georgia is ranked correctly. I can't get too worked up about that.
Notre Dame at 8, Tennessee 7,
mm-hmm.
BYU 6,
mm-hmm.
Indiana 5.
That's correct.
Penn State 4.
That's incorrect.
Texas 3.
Mm-hmm.
And those last 3 teams, by the way, Texas, Penn State, Indiana. Numbers 3, 4, and 5 in the poll.
Would be 5, 6, and 7 in the bracket.
Do not have a single ranked win. None of them.
No, you're not wrong.
3, 4, and 5 in the poll. It is
Penn
November
State
13th.
Gets a pass on that for some reason too. Everybody points out Indiana.
Yeah.
And Texas has gotten some stick over the fact that they've skipped out on Alabama and Ole Miss and those schools.
Then Georgia, but
Georgia's the one thing that beat them. Nobody mentions that Penn State has beaten no one.
Nobody.
And they really haven't been super impressive in the victories they've had.
And they lost to Ohio State, but the score is not reflective of how much better Ohio State was than them on their own field.
If Penn State and Indiana's teams switched uniforms, Penn State would be number 1. They'd be ahead of Oregon.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. Penn State being at 4,
J.D. Pickle, talked about this on his podcast last week. I thought it was a really good point because he brought up Michigan last year. Michigan beat nobody until they played Penn State and Ohio State in the last 2 games, right? They literally played no one.
Nobody.
But they were number 1. Why? Because they're Michigan.
Yep.
Indiana, exact same situation. Big Ten team, undefeated. They haven't really played anybody. 5th. Why? Because they're Indiana.
Because they're Indiana.
If you put Indiana's resume on Michigan's uniforms, they'd be the number 1 team in the nation.
They'd be number 1.
Yeah.
Texas 3, Ohio State 2, Oregon 1, by the way. Sure. So what would you change if you could change?
Oh, it's I probably have Indiana ahead of Penn State just because they're undefeated. Beyond that, I not a lot. Not a lot. I'll tell you the team I think is underrated. Not underrated. Underranked. There's a difference, right? Underrated means you think they're better, but underrated. Texas A&M at 15 with 2 losses. Their 2 losses are to the number 21 team in South Carolina.
Number 21 on the road.
And number 8.
And number 8.
That's 2 pretty good losses. That's 2 better losses than Ole Miss has. I'm not saying they should be ranked ahead of Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss would beat Texas A&M. But they're a little underranked, in my opinion.
Especially with SMU right in front of them. SMU has a loss, and it's the only decent team they've played this season in BYU.
Yeah. So I don't know. But of course, A&M can shut everybody up. They control their own destiny. If they win out there, they're going to the SEC championship game. So
isn't that crazy? By the way, we'll get to some of that a little bit later.
I have my scenarios. I'm ready.
There's a couple of things on these rankings that people pointed to, like the point of contention here. So the College Football Playoff Committee moved BYU and Indiana above Tennessee. Mm-hmm. So Tennessee, comfortable win at home, but they won the game. Mm-hmm. BYU needed a penalty to beat
which
it was the right call. But
a new video was brought out today. Somebody from the stands, and that is clearly. I mean, you see the jersey go
100% defensive.
He is 100% holding him. So,
but that's what they needed to beat a Utah team with a losing record.
Yeah.
And Indiana had Michigan is not a particularly good team, but Indiana won as well. The description for why that happened. Here's Ward Manuel from Michigan, who's the chair of the committee. Actually, we don't have time to read this. Well, I'll read this when we come back, and then we'll get into the bracket, and then who to root for and why when we come back. So, again, there's your playoff rankings. Ole Miss is at 11. It's very simple. Just win your final 2 games, and you'll make it. So that's a good spot for Ole Miss to be in.
Oh, I don't know.
I think if they win their next 2 games, they will be in because college football is going to do its thing. And by the way, Tennessee's in front of them.
I know
and
that.
They're going to lose on Saturday.
But that's where we're going to go.
Hold that thought. Sports Talk Mississippi Championship game as a 2-loss team when a 3rd loss will put you out. So if you believe the people on the committee, they will look at losses in conference championship games differently than a regular season loss because it is an extra game. However, your point's a good one. Going to the conference championship game is now a risk because if you lose it, even if you're firmly in the playoff, you have to play an extra game now. So it's something that Richard and I just kind of disagree with, and I don't think because we've had people ask about Ole Miss's scenarios to make the SEC championship, and I'm like, I don't think you want to right now. At this point, I don't know if you want to, because if you lose that game, you play an extra game.
The only thing I would say is it puts a trophy in the case, and right now,
if you win,
yeah. But I mean, would you rather be SEC champions and lose in the first round, or just lose in the first round? And I'm not saying Ole Miss is going to lose in the first round, but I'd rather be SEC champions. I guess you don't even lose in the first round. You lose in the second round. So,
if you win.
If you lose the championship game, yeah, because especially since there's not divisions anymore, it's not like you're the SEC West champion.
Right.
So, I don't know.
So,
but that being said, the committee they've said that they're not going to count those losses as harsh. So, we'll find out if they're telling the truth. I don't think it's going to be an issue because my predicted SEC championship game is 2 1-loss teams. So we'll see what happens when we get there. Yeah,
the committee also said last night, for what it's worth, that essentially laying out the fact that Ole Miss will remain ahead of Georgia as long as they win. That's what he said last night. But he also said this. He was asked about Tennessee getting jumped by Indiana and BYU. Yeah. And here was his answer. He was asked, like, if Nico's injury was a factor.
Right.
He said, I can say no to the injury to Tennessee's quarterback. It had nothing to do with it. It really came down to the play last week of both Indiana and BYU, both winning big games on their schedule. Tennessee, the offense has struggled some in the second half of the season, not being consistent early in the year. And we just felt as a committee that at this time, Indiana's been playing very well, a close win against Michigan. But other than that, they've dominated everyone they've played. BYU obviously undefeated, 2 wins against top 25 opponents at SMU against Kansas State. And looking at it as we assessed all the teams, it just felt that Indiana and BYU earned the 5 and the 6 slot, and Tennessee stayed where they are. But
who said that? A college football guy or a senator? I mean, it was just that was all gobbledygook.
I mean, Tennessee beat their opponent too. Well, they got punished anyway. So that's been that's the messaging from the committee is it's wildly inconsistent.
I mean, that's goes back to the 14 playoff, and when you have to send a human being out there to explain other human beings' decisions, it doesn't ever work out, right? They should just release. Here's the rankings. We have no comment. But instead we got to make a television show out of it and get extra advertising dollars, and that's why this is happening. But it's just ridiculous. They release these rankings every week, and then they turn around and try to explain a bunch of people who are just doing the eye test. That's all they're doing. They're just doing the eye test. The eye test should tell you that Tennessee is better than Indiana, I think, but it is what it is.
All right, and I've forced you to hold a thought. Release the thought.
I forgot what what were we talking about, Georgia?
It's about Georgia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Georgia plays Tennessee this week. All right. If they win that game, I think they're going to jump Ole Miss. Ole Miss is idle. Tennessee would have a top 10 win. All right. That would be 2 top 10 wins for Tennessee or for Georgia. And then you look at the rest of the way. They play UMass.
You think that they would jump Ole Miss, who just beat them by 3 scores?
I think so.
In dominating
They're
fashion.
only 1 spot behind them.
Right, but
I'm just telling you, don't be surprised.
I wouldn't be surprised because that's how things happen.
What I'm trying to tell you. And then
it shouldn't happen, though.
Well, what should and what is are 2 different things. And then they play UMass. That's not a great win, obviously. Ole Miss plays Florida. Last weekend of the season, when they played Georgia Tech, who's a decent team, and Ole Miss plays Mississippi State, that's a chance for Georgia to get another good win, and Ole Miss does not have that opportunity. So I'm just saying, when we do we're supposed to, a little later in the show, we're going to do who Ole Miss needs to root for. Tennessee is near the top of your list.
I think that's totally wrong.
Oh, I disagree. You want Georgia with 3 losses. Get them out. You want Georgia out.
But that is the line item on the resume that
I get. No, it'll still be a good win if they're 15th or 16th. But you don't want them comparing resumes with you. You do not want that.
But a Tennessee loss.
Now a Tennessee loss makes them 2 losses, Ole Miss 2 losses, Alabama 2 losses, Georgia 2 losses. Ole Miss.
But Ole Miss's resume would be better than Tennessee's.
They would have beaten Alabama, which would be ranked higher than Georgia. Would it be better?
With a Georgia
North
win over
Carolina
Tennessee.
State is also a better.
NC State's garbage. That's
a better win
gone.
than any Ole Miss non-conference win.
But it's.
I mean, I get it. I'm just saying. I'm just trying to. If we got to get into the minutia, into the details, that's a better win than any of Ole Miss's non-conference wins. So Tennessee with 2. I don't think you
Ole
want
Miss
that.
will jump Tennessee if Tennessee loses to Georgia this weekend.
I don't think you want to be in
will.
the jumble with Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M up to the point where they play Texas. You don't want to be in the jump. Just get Georgia out. 3 losses, they're out of the discussion. You don't have to worry about them anymore.
I don't agree.
Okay.
I don't. Tennessee would not plummet, but they would fall behind Ole Miss. And they wouldn't have an opportunity to get a resume win to get back ahead of them. They would fall behind Ole Miss.
Who does Tennessee have left on the schedule after all that? They would play UTEP, no good. But at Vanderbilt, that's not if they win that game, it's not a terrible win.
No,
that's
but
it's
I mean,
that's a better win than Mississippi State.
Yeah, but
and you're talking about they plummet. I mean, or they would fall. So what are they? They're 6th. Is that correct?
Tennessee is currently 7.
If they drop a close game to Georgia, they're not going to drop to 12th, are they?
Yes.
Okay. then Georgia
because they would have to be behind Georgia,
and in which case,
Georgia would have to be behind Ole Miss.
They don't have to do anything. That's what you're missing here.
Yeah,
they don't have to do anything.
But
there is no if head-to-head is the first tiebreaker. That doesn't exist. There is a world where Georgia and Ole Miss finish 10-2 each, and Georgia gets in and Ole Miss doesn't. That world does exist. I'm not saying it's likely, probable. I'm definitely not saying it should happen. I'm just telling you that it does exist.
It does. We saw this committee a year ago put Alabama in over Georgia because of a head-to-head result, even though Georgia was better than Alabama.
But they also put Alabama ahead of Florida State, who was undefeated. An undefeated Power 5 conference champion got left out. They just make it up as they go, Michael. They don't have any set rules for all of this. It's like whose line is it anyway out there? The points don't matter. So I'm just telling you, I disagree with you. Get Georgia out. 9-3 Georgia is still a really good win. You'll be fine, but you don't be in the mix with them. Get them out.
We'll go to the text line. Borky's right. Two common opponents, Arkansas and Georgia. Tennessee lost to both. Ole Miss beat both. Recency bias is real, which helps Ole Miss if they dominate and win out. Somebody says, "Hey, that's bias is showing hard."
How am I biased?
No, I do think, like, I was thinking about that last night. Heather Dinich of ESPN kind of laid the groundwork of.
Guys, your friend Haydad is trying to help you out here. I'm trying to give you the path that makes it easiest. The easiest path to this is Georgia getting a third loss and being out of the discussion entirely. Because Tennessee at 10-2 is going to get in. If they lose to Georgia and they win the next, they're going to get in.
Are they? Because their resume will not be
they will get
what
in.
Georgia's is, and it will not be what Ole Miss is.
I'm telling you, but it wouldn't. I'm telling you, it's being up all night the night before the reveal, wondering if your team is in versus they're in. Just get Georgia out of the discussion. Get them a third loss.
Let's see. Wouldn't Ole Miss move up if Georgia also moves up? We'll have to see next Tuesday if the result goes.
You just don't know that for sure. You just talked about Indiana and BYU jumping Tennessee. Tennessee did everything they could do. I mean, I guess if we could go back in time, Josh Heupel would have run it up. Could have easily had 40-plus points in that game. He took it easy because Levy's his bro.
Yeah, and, frankly,
maybe he shouldn't have done it.
Probably is a factor.
Yeah.
Somebody says Tennessee needs to put Georgia away and out of the way. If Georgia wins, they jump Ole Miss. Haydad knows what he's talking about from an Ole Miss fan. I agree with Haydad. You should get Georgia completely out of the mix.
There's no bias here, guys. I think Ole Miss is going to get it. I love this. I'm biased. I picked Ole Miss to go 11-1 this year.
And I didn't.
And I picked them to win the game on Friday. Where's the bias? I'm just trying to be truthful.
Ole Miss fan here tend to agree with Haydad. Ole Miss has two bad losses. No, a ranked road loss is not bad.
No, the LSU loss is fine, but Kentucky's bad.
Kentucky's a bad loss.
And it's a worse loss than Arkansas is for Tennessee.
True, but Ole Miss did, which is so crazy about all this, Ole Miss went to that same field and
killed them,
beat the heck out of them.
So
interesting stuff. Now let's do the who to root for guide, because we got the question, and I think he's right, about should Ole Miss run it up against Florida and Mississippi State? If the opportunity presents itself, yes.
Then
now,
they need to,
you got to win the games, of course, and that's what matters most. But yes, if you got a 3-touchdown lead and it's the fourth quarter in Gainesville, you got to leave Jackson Dart in there and let him throw the ball around a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And, I know that there's the history with Kiffin and Levy and all that, and sure, and maybe you don't want to, but if you have the opportunity to blow Mississippi State out, you have to.
Yeah.
Because
you should take that opportunity even if you're 8-4.
Right. Well, of course.
Win your rivalry game as much as you can. It gets credit.
But the quote we read earlier from Michigan's AD, who's the voice of the committee, justifying their decisions, and I say that, so they're kind of making it up as they go along, because on one hand he said, Ole Miss is in front of Georgia and they will remain there because of that win, but also Indiana and BYU just jumped Tennessee because they just did.
We need to understand that there's no. Somebody on the text line said, head to head is the first tiebreaker. There are no tiebreakers. This isn't the SEC championship. This is a totally arbitrary formula. They make it up as they go.
Give totally different answers on the same question, just about different teams.
Next week, all of it could hold. Everything could hold. And, for some reason, Alabama could be ahead of Georgia. Alabama could be ahead of Penn State. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. So,
and his quote kind of leads you to believe that. So let's start with number one, Oregon. I mean, it just doesn't matter, right? For an Ole Miss fan, it doesn't matter there.
Well, let's do it like this, if you don't mind. I have 5 teams written down that Ole Miss needs to cheer for, and the first one, we talked about this on Monday. That's BYU. You want BYU as the undefeated Big 12 champion.
Yes.
A undefeated BYU that loses in the Big 12 championship game to Colorado is going to get in. They are going to get in. They will steal a bid.
There certainly will be a strong argument, yes.
Yes, and I just feel like, I remember TCU a couple of years ago. That's what BYU is. BYU undefeated. They're the top 4 seed. They are not stealing an at-large. Keep them undefeated. You want BYU in. That is the most important one to Ole Miss, in my opinion.
Their remaining schedule this weekend at Arizona State and then Houston at home.
They're at Kansas, I thought.
Oh, no, excuse me. I looked at the last 2 weeks. They're hosting Kansas.
Yeah.
They go to Arizona State and then host Houston.
Those are, there's some Arizona State. First off, Arizona State. What a team. Unbelievable.
Now, if BYU loses one of those games,
then you're okay.
Then you're fine.
They're out, yeah. But if BYU gets to the Big 12 championship game undefeated, you need them to win. You need them to win it. The next team, in my opinion, that Ole Miss needs to root for is Ohio State. You want Ohio State to beat Indiana.
Ohio State this weekend at Northwestern, hosting Indiana and Michigan.
So, it's two-pronged, though. You want Ohio State to beat Indiana. Now, I think Indiana is going to get in regardless. I think you and I disagree on that. But I think 11-1 Indiana is getting in. What you don't want is Ohio State with 2 losses, because then they're being compared to Ole Miss. And you just don't want that. So you want Ohio State. You don't want
the helmet bias to creep in, because it will.
And Ohio State would have a win over Penn State, which is a better win than Ole Miss has. And their 2 losses would be to undefeated Indiana and undefeated Oregon. Their resume is just better. So you want Ohio State to beat Indiana.
And for good measure, soundly.
But
beat the brakes off of them.
If Indiana does beat Ohio State, now we're pulling for Michigan if you're an Ole Miss fan. You need them again. It's the same thing I just said with Georgia. You need them out. So you want Michigan to beat Ohio State. Now, that seems unlikely, but that's a rivalry game and crazy things can happen. And that's how we're going to look at that. So if Ohio State loses to Indiana, you want Ohio State to lose to Michigan as well. You want Ohio State out of the discussion, now I will say this. Maybe you don't want that, because 9-3 Ohio State is firing Ryan Day, and I'd be gobsmacked if they didn't call Lane Kiffin just to talk to him.
I know who they're hiring.
Who do you think?
Kurt Cignetti.
You think he can get him out after 1 year?
Yep.
Boy,
to Ohio State.
I mean, I don't disagree with you, but what a punch in the gut that would have been.
But
all right.
I do think that if Indiana is 11-1 and the one good team that they played is Ohio State, and Ohio State beat them by 4 touchdowns. Like, if it's just a rear end kicking, a 10-2 SEC team would have a claim over the 11-1 Indiana.
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree. All right. I mentioned Tennessee already. I firmly believe that they need to beat Georgia.
Tennessee's remaining games beside that, we mentioned earlier, UTEP and at Vanderbilt.
And I'll say this. It doesn't really matter for Tennessee after this weekend. You just need to root for them this weekend. You want them to beat Georgia. After that, if they lose to Vanderbilt, fine. That's fine. Ole Miss is fine in that scenario. But get Georgia out. So, I mean, I guess you could say you might want to root for Georgia Tech if it comes to that, but that seems unlikely. I mean, I don't want you guys to waste your energy. I'll put it that way. The last one is Texas. You need to root for Texas to run the table. Because if Texas A&M beats them, Texas A&M's going to the SEC championship game that point, because they only have 1 conference loss. And now Texas is in the pile with you. And I know what you're about to say. I know. Ole Miss's resume is better than Texas.
It would be a lot better than Texas.
It is 100% better. But you know, and I know, you and I both know, and we know that we know, that Texas is not falling out of the top 12. They're not. So a 10-2 Texas is not a good thing for Ole Miss. You want Texas just to run the table, get to the SEC championship game. Doesn't matter if they win or lose at that point. Texas is one that Ole Miss,
Arkansas, Kentucky, at A&M.
You need them to win them all. You need them to win them all. Just win out if you're Texas.
Or lose to Arkansas this weekend and beat Texas A&M.
Yeah, that would be fine too. But that seems unlikely. Again, we're trying not to waste our energy here. Yeah, there's no point in finding these. I mean, I could get ridiculous scenarios where Oregon loses to Washington and everything else, but who cares?
College football does that sometimes.
It has been known to do it. Outside of that, I mean, another Notre. Oh, I'll give you one more. I do have one more. Notre Dame. You need to root for Notre Dame to beat Army. And I know we're all Patriots here, but a undefeated Army and Boise only losing one game is trouble.
That's not
It's
good.
trouble. It's just trouble you don't want.
Although undefeated Army with win over Notre Dame absolutely would get in ahead of Boise State.
They would.
And Boise State's best line item would be a loss.
It would be a loss. There's no question. It's just iffy, though.
Just prefer not.
Just get it over with.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Army with one loss, they're out of the discussion entirely. Army beats Notre Dame, and all of a sudden you're sweating. It's just a little bit of a sweat.
Notre Dame's final three: Virginia at home, Army in Yankee Stadium, and at Southern Cal.
They're going to beat Southern Cal.
I think so, too.
Yeah, Notre Dame should go undefeated the rest of the way, but you want them to beat Army. You don't want to cheer for Army in that situation. No offense to our great veterans out there. And Dwight saying Army knocks out Notre Dame. I don't know. I don't know if it knocks out Notre Dame. That's two not great losses for Notre Dame. I just don't know. It's Notre Dame. I'm telling you, these people running these committees value the brands. They do. We saw it last year.
Because somebody says if A&M beats Texas or is Texas out, they will not have a ranked win. Texas's best win would be Vanderbilt, which they would not be ranked. And Ole Miss would have a win over Georgia and a road win at South Carolina, who, if they continue to play like this, will be ranked.
Don't know that it would matter. Texas would stay in.
The brand bias thing
is real. All right? This is your friend Haydad.
We would argue that Ole Miss would belong over Texas until we're blue in the face.
100% argue that. They would absolutely have a better resume. They're a better team. But
listen to the committee chair talk.
Would get in.
And you won't have any confidence in the process.
Yeah, so.
Somebody says Army isn't jumping Ole Miss from 12 spots back.
They don't have to jump Ole Miss. They have to jump Boise.
They have to jump Boise. That's all they have to do, is they have to be ahead of Boise. That's it. And a win over Notre Dame in a neutral site will jump them ahead of Boise.
And then Boise, Ole Miss becomes the discussion. And if it's a one-loss Boise.
Ole Miss wins that discussion, though.
They should. They should.
Especially if Army's in.
Does the committee say, hey, this kid might win the Heisman. Don't we want him in the playoff? I'm just telling you, these are people making these decisions. These are not machines. People make rash, emotional decisions every day of the week. You just don't. It's just something you don't want. I'm just giving you the easiest path here. The easiest path is Army out.
Ricky says 2-loss Tennessee is out, but Bud Elliott seems to think so, and I think so too. Haydad does not. Well, we're just going to have to fist fight about it later.
Yeah. So as asked, if they're biased to the brand, why is Georgia outside looking in right now? Because it's now. It's not the end. Let's go a few more weeks and let everything stay. And if Georgia jumps Ole Miss, I can say I told you so.
And
just get them out.
And they have the benefit of things working itself out. There's still 3 more weeks. Losses will happen. Mm-hmm. But, yeah. Sports Talk.